Hey, Nashville. We are a guide to healthy living, and we are your local health and wellness experts. We want you to know that, you know what? Health ain't hard, y'all, and you just need to know where to start. So I'm Dr. Liz Baker.
And I'm Dr. Jason Reinhardt.
And we're here each week with tips and information and different health topics to guide you through how to live a healthy life.
Yeah, how to get off whatever, I always say it, the rat race, the hamster wheel, whatever you're on. So many people come into our offices week after week. They're trying so hard to regain their health. They're lost. They don't know where to go. They're banging their head. And you know what? We're here to give you another option. We're here to say you're not lost. It's not helpless. You just need to look in a new area. Yeah.
So today's topic, I feel like, is, I would say, a constant hot topic amongst my patients, especially my women patients. I get questions about this a couple times a week, all year round, basically. How about you?
Yeah, all the time. It's a huge topic. And, you know, I think about when I first started chiropractic, I didn't hear about it anywhere as much as I hear about it now. And I hear about it, you know, just about every week. And it's mostly from my female patients.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it does typically affect women more than men anyways. Yeah. But it's becoming more common. It's becoming more... I guess common's the best word to use for it. More common in our society, more common with our patients. And a lot of it's due to some things that we're doing day to day that we don't realize are affecting this particular process that we're going to talk about.
Yeah. You want to jump into it and tell our listeners what we're talking about?
So we're actually going to talk about something a little different today. If you've listened to our show before, we really enjoy talking about headaches and neck pain. And, you know, we're both chiropractors, so we focus a lot on chiropractic care. But today we're going to take a little bit of an angle change, an angle shift today, and talk about thyroid.
Yeah, thyroid, huge topic. And, you know, it's very interesting as I was, you know, just going over my notes for the show and, you know, just researching it and just pulling together a lot of people that I have as patients that have thyroid issues. It's always so interesting because very rarely does somebody come into my office that their main complaint is thyroid. Usually it's neck pain. And as I'm going through their complete history, or I'm looking at medications that are on, thyroid always comes up. It's always tied together.
Mm-hmm. Very, very common that they do come together. And we're going to talk a little bit more of why that is, what are some ways that we can help prevent our thyroid from malfunctioning, because the most common problem with thyroids is low thyroid function, and that's what most people are familiar with. That's the one that creates the weight gain, the one that makes your hair fall out. Most people are mostly concerned about the weight gain that comes with thyroid function, but it also comes with a bunch of other aches and pains that you may not associate with your thyroid. And so that's kind of the stuff we're going to talk about today. Maybe some good tips that can help you make small changes in your daily diet, your daily life, and your daily lifestyle to help improve your thyroid's function. Yeah.
And I'm a huge proponent of educating people that function follows structure. And I educate my patients on this all the time, and it's amazing when I see that light bulb go on and they have that aha moment where I'm showing them, I'm going over their x-rays, I'm showing them the dysfunction in their neck, and then I'm showing them where the individual nerves are exiting those portions of the neck and what organ systems they're going to. And they can see, wow, my neck isn't looking right there. Boom. Then we go over to a chart of your nervous system. They're looking where those nerves go. They're like, oh my gosh, that goes to my thyroid. It's like that aha moment. Boom. They're going, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. And of course, your nerve function is super important in any aspect of your body, any aspect of your health, any aspect of any organ function. Nervous system control is a big part of it. But we're also going to talk into, you know, some supplements that are good for thyroid, some things that you should be avoiding at all costs 100% of the time if you have thyroid function issues, or if your family has thyroid function issues, you don't want to trigger those in yourself as well. So one thing to say about thyroid, I'm banging on the microphone. You can probably hear that. Did you hear that?
I did. That's all right. You're getting
excited. That's
what
that noise was.
I like it.
I know. I get very excited about this one because this one actually runs in my family. My mother, my grandmother both have struggles with low thyroid function as well. And I know a lot of people in my office do as well, and a lot of women across the country do. So a couple things to know about thyroids. Once your genetics have triggered on the signal to create a problem with your thyroid, it's really hard to turn that off. But What we do know, because we've got more research and more science behind it, is there are a lot of things you can do to prevent turning that switch on. Once the switch is on, it's really hard to turn it off. Once those genes are activated, it's really hard to suppress them. It's a lot more work. It's a lot more difficult, but there's a lot more things you can do to never let that switch turn on. And so that's what we want to talk about today. Our first tip, of course, we are chiropractors, and so as Jason was already talking about, we're going to talk about the structural component of a thyroid problem.
Yep. And like I said earlier, function follows structure, meaning that I don't care what you have, if the innervation to that isn't working right, it's not going to work right. And people say, well, what the heck does that mean? I say, like, you could build this beautiful kitchen and, man, I got this awesome Sub-Zero fridge, and then I go to put it right where it needs to be, and I go to plug it into the wall outlet, and there is no wall outlet. Yeah. That fridge is worthless. It needs a power supply.
Or maybe there is an outlet. Maybe the outlet doesn't work.
Yeah, or maybe the outlet isn't wired right, and it's like it's not enough power to make this fridge work.
Yeah, exactly. So that's what we're going to talk about first. Is our first number one tip is actually chiropractic care. I have actually been surprised by the patients. There's not a ton of them, I will say, but the patients that have been able to physically get off their thyroid medication. They were new to the medication. They haven't been reliant on it for very long, and they were actually able to either reduce or get off of their medication altogether, which was excellent.
Yeah, I've had many patients like that, and we always work with their medical doctors, and what we say is, go back to your medical doctor, tell them where you're at right now, tell them your goal is to get off this medication, so you're working with them, and then have them retest your levels. And it's amazing. And I've had many times where the doctors called me up and said, hey, doc, I just want to say we retested. Levels are getting within normal limits. We're getting them off the meds. Keep up the good work. And I'm like, that's awesome. I love co-managing like that.
And the important thing to know with those patients is they did a lot of work themselves at home. They stuck with our recommendations, and they did what we told them to do. And you know what? It friggin' worked.
Yeah, and it's just like anything. Dr. Liz is exactly right. You can make sure the thyroid's working perfect, then you want to do everything you can to support it working perfect.
Absolutely. And so when we return here in a moment, I want to talk a little bit more about how chiropractic care can actually help the thyroid. But in case you don't know, when you have low thyroid function, it can actually create musculoskeletal pain, headaches, and of course that weight gain that everybody's concerned about, but it also doesn't allow your body to produce the right types of proteins to repair other tissues in your body. So that's what I want to talk about when we come back. You're listening to A Guide to Healthy Living, and we are your health and wellness experts, and we're talking about the thyroid today. It's a hot topic. We'll be back in just a few minutes. All right, and welcome back to A Guide to Healthy Living, where today we are talking about thyroid function. I am Dr. Liz Baker.
I'm Dr. Jason Reinertz.
And we are both wellness chiropractors here out of Nashville, Tennessee, and we're having a twist on our normal topic and our normal subject today, where we're talking about your thyroid. And right now what we're talking about is how chiropractic care has been shown in research to actually improve thyroid function. So I actually want to talk a little, I guess, anatomy and physiology and how that actually works. Because when you think about it at first, it's like, well, how the heck how does that help?
Yeah, let's get into it, because it's one of these topics that it's so sad to me when I see just, so many. And like I said, it's mostly women. They're coming in and they're just so sad. They're just so distraught. They're like, I've been told my thyroid's not working right. I'm gaining weight. I've had saying, they believe it's related to losing hair. I mean, all these things, and they just want their life back. And they've tried so many things. It's just not working for them, and they're looking to us for another solution. So let's get into it.
Yeah, so we're going to try to glaze over as easy as possible to make this understandable for the normal person that doesn't read into this weird stuff like we do. Anatomically, the nerves that innervate the thyroid come from a very major nerve in your body called the vagus nerve. Now, we're not talking about Las Vegas, but what the vagus nerve does is it comes straight from your brain, and it has a direct connection straight to your brain. But those little branches actually have to pass through your neck and where your spinal cord comes through. Those nerves, of course, like you've heard before on our shows, if you've listened to us before, when those nerves don't function properly, if there's pressure on those nerves, they're not able to fully send all those messages to that particular body part or that particular tissue. So that's one way that the thyroid function can be diminished by the suppressed nerves in that area.
Yeah, I always say it when I'm explaining to my patients about nervous system, how it works. I always say, you have a perfectly healthy heart and I cut all those nerves to your heart, how's your heart going to work?
Right, or not even all of them. Let's just say you cut 10% of them.
Well, that's where I go next. I say, okay, the heart's going to completely die. It doesn't matter that the heart is perfect. It has no life going to it. It's going to die. Then to your point, what happens if we cut 10% of it?
Yeah, 90% still works, but what if that other 10% is that 10% was in charge of, let's say, heartbeat, the pattern of your heartbeat. Let's say that 10% of those nerves were the pattern of the heartbeat. Let's look at the thyroid. Maybe that particular 10% of those nerves were in control of secreting the proper hormone when you eat a particular food, and that part's not working anymore.
And these people, that are coming in with these severe thyroid issues, they're not at, I wish I could say that they were at, you still have 90% work. No, they're at like probably 40% working to that thyroid. So it is severely shut down. It's malfunctioning. Well, of course it is. It's not getting what it needs to be healthy.
And it's usually that way for years and years before you notice the symptoms of it, which is the other part of it. So the other part of that vagus nerve, that Las Vegas nerve, is there's something called vagal nerve stimulation. And if you've been in the health and wellness field for a little while, you've probably heard of this. By stimulating the vagus nerve, it can actually wake up how those nerves function and wake up and make those nerves work better. And regular chiropractic care actually increases your vagus nerve activity, which is how we are able to improve some of that thyroid function that is hindered or lost. So if you would like to see if we could help you out, we have a special kind of set of x-rays that we take, and we also have just a limited number of spots each week that we can do to look to see if maybe your spine is part of what's causing you your thyroid problem. So for our special we have for our listeners includes a consultation, exam, x-rays, and your first adjustment. This is normally over a $250 value, but for the next 20 callers, it's only $40. We've got offices in Brentwood, Franklin, Murfreesboro, and Hendersonville. Eventually, we're going to have doctors in East Nashville and Dixon. This offer, however, is not good for Medicare, but give us a call, 615-727-3107, or check us out at aguidetohealthylivingradio.com. Again, that number is 615-727-3107. Give us a call and let's see if we can help you out.
Sounds perfect. That's awesome. So we've talked about chiropractic. I know we have a number of other topics coming up and how to help thyroid. So let's jump into number 2. I know I was always looking at our time because we have so much to talk about. I'm like, where's the time go? So let's get on to it.
We could probably talk for 3 hours straight on the things you can do for thyroid function. So we've whittled them down to what we think is our favorite top 4.
And our producers all wrap it up, get on with it. So
our top 4.
Let's get into it.
Number 1, of course, chiropractic care and that vagus nerve stimulation. You've got to get the nerve flow to the thyroid so that it can work properly. Tip number 2, you've probably heard that iodine is a good supplement for your thyroid, but have you ever heard about something called selenium?
Heard about it, but not anywhere as much as I've heard about iodine.
Absolutely. So let's touch on iodine. So there's foods that you can eat that are higher in iodine. I know a lot of people will think, well, I get plenty of iodine from my salt. So first, let me talk about the salt. So the FDA approved 2 types of iodine to be used in that salt iodization process. However, the World Health Organization only recommends one of those 2. So you can't really rely on your salt to give you enough of that iodine because it may not be the right kind of iodine that your body absorbs. Dr. Jason and myself actually use something called pink Himalayan salt. Or you can also use sea salt, like Celtic sea salt. Those are 2 good options as well that have the proper type of iodine in it. Food sources. Let's talk about what the food sources of iodine are.
Yeah, let's get into it.
So you've probably heard of seaweed. You can actually eat seaweed.
I do. I love it. You can just go to the store, you get those little
packs.
Green packs of it, wrap stuff up in it. Boom. A little salty, but it's good.
Salty, crunchy.
That's what we're looking for.
Yeah, seaweed and kelp. Those are 2. Those particular things are probably the highest in iodine concentration as far as all foods go, and it actually tastes pretty good. It's kind of salty, it's kind of crunchy, and I think it's like 1,000% of iodine in your daily, requirements just by eating a little bit of seaweed or kelp. And I know that sounds gross, but you can find pretty tasty ones. But let's say you're not so into eating kelp. Pasture-raised eggs. Specifically pasture raised because those chickens actually grazed on not only the seeds and things that it found out there, but also the little bugs and grubs and worms, just like other birds do. And their eggs actually contain more iodine than regular old conventional eggs. As well as wild-caught cod, if you like fish. That's another good one.
What about we know about iodine, but we were also talking about the lesser-known selenium.
Selenium. So now, we've covered iodine. That's the one people have heard about more. So let's talk a little bit more about selenium. So if your levels of selenium are low, your thyroid will have to do extra hard work and work harder to actually make its thyroid hormones. I would say it might even be more important than iodine in our day-to-day diets now because we do get iodized salt. Iodine deficiency is not near as common as selenium deficiency. So if your thyroid's having to work twice as hard to make those hormones, it will also make it have a more difficult job to change those hormones into the form that your body can actually use. So selenium is going to help balance out those thyroid hormones as well. Foods that are high in selenium. You want to go over those, Dr. Jason?
Yeah, you know what? I'm thinking here, just all the foods that come to mind, but like Brazilian nuts. I always say with any kind of fish, it's always wild caught what I'm looking for. So it's wild caught yellowfin, tuna, halibut, and again, you already talked on the eggs, but specifically they need to be pasture raised.
They have to be the pasture raised ones. Regular old eggs do not have high concentrations of selenium or iodine or the healthy kind of cholesterol that everybody's worried about. Brazil nuts on that list is the highest concentration of selenium of anything else. I think if you look at the percentages of what it actually contains, it was like 50% of your daily value, and then it jumps down to like 20% when you start moving on to the next food item on that list. So a couple of good fishes there that you can easily make some good fish dishes, but make sure they are wild caught.
Yeah. And you know what? For just your taste buds too, I always say this, go buy your conventional eggs in a store and then find someone local that has chickens that are pasture raised. The eggs taste completely different.
They look different.
And they look different, and they taste so much better. So you'll even be just your taste buds will be happier.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's get into what we talked about already. Tip number 1 was chiropractic care. We've got to stimulate that vagus nerve so that it can function properly, so that it can send the proper messages to that thyroid. And for those those listeners who want to become patients, we have a special offer, and we've already started to drop down the number that we have available. We normally start out with 20, and we've dropped down to 17 already, but we've got 17 spots left. This includes a consultation, an exam, x-rays, and your first adjustment. It's normally over $250, but for the next 17 people, it's only $40. We've got offices in Brentwood, Franklin, Murfreesboro, Hendersonville. Give us a call at 615-727-3107 or check us out at aguidetohealthylivingradio.com. Again, one more time, that number 615-727-3107. And of course, the second tip was iodine and selenium. We've got 2 more tips coming back when you come back from break. So stay tuned, and we're going to talk about what foods you must avoid at all costs, and you'll be really surprised at what those are. So stay tuned. I'm back. Welcome back. You're listening to A Guide to Healthy Living. I'm Dr. Liz Baker.
I'm Dr. Jason Reinhardt.
And I'm Batman.
I like that.
Anyway.
I guess that makes me Boy Wonder, so I don't know.
And that
if I
makes
like
Dr.
that.
Jason Robin.
I don't think I look good in his little tights.
No, well, I don't know. I don't know if I'd look good in all that fake muscly stuff either. But we were just talking about that over the break that I'm Batman, so I'm okay with that. Yeah. Anyways, if you're just tuning in, our topic today is a little different than it normally is, and we're talking about thyroid function, specifically low thyroid function. Why don't you recap what we've already talked about, Dr. Jason?
Yeah, we talked about we briefly hit on structure dictating function. That's where chiropractic comes in. You got to make sure that structure is correct, particularly in the neck where those nerves exit, make the thyroid work properly. That's where chiropractic adjustments come in, remove interference, make sure that organ's getting what it needs to be healthy. And
specifically, the vagus nerve. So if you're one of our medical-minded people, that's what we're actually talking about is vagal stimulation to the thyroid.
So that was number 1. Number 2 we covered is something that you want to make sure that you're getting enough of in your diet. It's iodine and selenium. We also gave a number of foods where you can naturally get those. Also hit on if you're getting them from fish or from eggs, we want wild caught and pasture raised.
Absolutely, because those have a significantly higher nutritional value than conventional farm raised or whatever they call that, a feedlot raised or farm-raised fish. Yeah. They feed the animals an unnatural diet, which causes the meat or the eggs to have a different level of nutrition in them altogether. So not farm raised, wild caught or pasture raised.
Yep.
And then we also were teasering what we were going to talk about when we got back from break, and it's the foods that you should avoid when you have already, diagnosed with a low thyroid function, and you'd be really surprised with what these foods actually are.
Yeah, let's get into it.
Yes.
I am surprised. I'm looking at it right now, and again, even when we went over this show, I was going, really? Wow, okay.
And I was too, and I actually did pretty extensive research to make sure that this was the best information, and I found it in multiple locations that it also pointed towards this. So these are actually vegetables, and it's very rare that Dr. Jason and myself will say avoid certain vegetables. So let's get right into it. Something called cruciferous vegetables. And if you don't know what a cruciferous vegetable is, that's going to be your broccoli, your cauliflower, your cabbage, and your Brussels sprouts. And I actually really enjoy all 4 of these.
Kids are listening right now going, yes, I knew it.
Now, kids are fine because they may not have a low thyroid, but if you already have a selenium or iodine deficiency, you need to limit, not cut out completely, but limit your access to raw cruciferous vegetables. Now, you still can eat them, but you got to steam them.
Yeah.
Now, as far as the science of why steaming them is better than unsteamed, it has to do with the enzyme breakdown, and it's too hard to explain. But, Brussels sprouts, I don't know that I've ever eaten terribly a large amount of raw Brussels sprouts, but everything else I do typically eat raw.
Yeah.
So steaming them, and not just a light steam, they actually want you to cook them, for a good 10 minutes, not just a quick steam. So those are foods that you need to limit. Raw cruciferous vegetables, broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, and cabbage.
Now, the foods to completely avoid were no surprise at all.
Right. Now, there's 2 foods or 2, categories. These are more broad. These are things you should avoid at all costs and for really good reasons. The number 1 is soy. Soy has a huge connection and correlation with a thyroid problem. And in some studies, they are actually thinking it may be what's causing some of these thyroid problems outside of secondary and tertiary causes. Soy is the number 1, and gluten is number 2. These are the 2 major contributors of thyroid problems. And let's break those down.
Yeah, and for most people, soy and gluten are already on their radar. Whether it's for a thyroid issue or an other health condition, they're already looking at them. They're big topics today in the dietary world.
Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit more about why you should avoid soy at all costs. There's, like I said, tons of good reasons to avoid it, but most of the soy, especially what we have access to in America, is genetically modified, and this is a hot topic as well. You'll find pros and cons to both sides of the story, but once they've genetically modified these beans, it makes them different when you digest them. It's very difficult to digest. So even if they're high in protein and that sort of thing, you actually absorb very little soy protein in your gut. When you're digesting soy, your body doesn't have the proper enzymes to basically digest in your system, or digest soy in your system. And there's something specifically called soy lecithin, which is what I find even in lots of organic snacks that they use. I'm not even sure what that emulsifier. I'm not even sure what it actually is, but it's literally in everything.
It's in so many things.
It's in things that I'm really sad to know that it's actually in, but something called soy lecithin. It actually causes an irritation to your gut lining and actually can cause or worsen something called leaky gut syndrome, which is also something that can stimulate or aggravate a already low functioning thyroid. But also, soy inhibits your absorption of iodine, which then leads to that iodine deficiency. And as we just said, a low iodine deficiency, or iodine deficiency itself, can cause a low thyroid.
It's a vicious circle, and that's why knowledge is power, because people, they think they're doing the right thing, and in fact, you're hurting yourself, and you had no idea you were even doing it.
Yeah, so you really got to read labels. Soy isn't everything, especially that little tricky soy lecithin. It sounds very kind of like, what is that? It's labeled. I'm not really sure what it is. Oh, well, that's actually the biggest one. Tofu, that's an obvious one too, but also those little edamame beans. I used to love those things, but I've stopped eating those. I haven't had those in a long time. So be cautious of how often you're having those cheat meals or those treats that contain soy, especially if you already have a low functioning thyroid. Let's talk about gluten next.
Yeah. Gluten, again, I'm sure no one's really surprised to hear it. Maybe they're surprised a little bit to hear a tie between gluten and thyroid. But for most people, they're just trying to remove gluten from their diet anyways.
Right. So a lot of the thyroid problems, like we said, are caused by the soy. A lot of them are caused by gluten issues. But what really, if you go a little step further, what actually happens is gluten can trigger autoimmune deficiencies or autoimmune diseases, meaning your immune system actually produces antibodies that attack the thyroid gland itself. So gluten can cause you to have an immune deficiency due to your body not absorbing things properly, and then it triggers a mechanism that causes it to attack your own body parts as opposed to the bad stuff. It attacks the good stuff.
Yeah. And most people, if they're just trying to get healthy, I see this in my office all the time. They're saying, I always hear this when I'm going over their initial histories, they're saying, I'm trying to go gluten-free. It's one of the first steps I see people now taking, trying to get, on a more healthy diet.
Yeah, and they actually have names for the thyroid autoimmune deficiency problems. The underactive thyroid, of course, people just usually say I have hypo with an O, hypothyroidism, but it can also be called Hashimoto's disease. That is the autoimmune version of a low-functioning thyroid. And then there's the more rare one where it's an overactive thyroid, and that's called Graves' disease. What I'd like to do, what you pointing at there?
Oh.
What I'd like to do now is kind of recap what we've talked about as far as our tips that we've gotten through so far. First, our first tip was, of course, chiropractic care.
Yep, chiropractic. It's a foundation of everything we do, because the way I look at it is you got to make sure your structure's right. You got to make sure that nerve supply is right, so the thyroid's getting what it needs. Then you want to do all these other things to help it.
Yep, and we've got to get the proper stimulation to those nerves to make sure that thyroid's functioning properly by addressing potential misalignments that you could have in your cervical spine or upper back. And that's where Dr. Jason and I are experts, as well as our other doctors that we have as well around town. We have an offer that we do every week on our radio show that we offer our listeners consultation and exam, x-rays, and your first adjustment. Normally, this is only $250, or normally this is over $250, but for the next, how many we got left? About 10 callers left. It's only $40. We have offices in Brentwood, Franklin, Murfreesboro, and Hendersonville. Give us a call at 615-727-3107 or check us out online at aguidetohealthylivingradio.com. Again, that number, 615-727-3107. And that was our number one tip.
Yep, number one.
A number one tip. And our number two tip was iodine-rich foods, selenium-rich foods. Mm-hmm. And then number three tip was reduce the amount of raw broccoli, raw cauliflower, raw Brussels sprouts, and raw cabbage in your diet. You can still have it. You just got to cook it. But then avoid completely soy and gluten. When we get back, we're going to talk about one last tip, things that you may not even think about or even know anything about, something that actually is considered a hormone disruptor called bromines. That sounds exciting, right? So stay tuned. We're going to talk about where these bromines are located and how you have access to them and where you're finding them. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with A Guide to Healthy Living. Welcome back. You're listening to A Guide to Healthy Living. I'm Dr. Liz Baker.
I'm Dr. Jason Reinertz.
And we're your local health and wellness experts. And what is our topic we've been talking about today?
We're talking about thyroid. It's something that we see week in, week out in our office. It's affecting so many people. We're looking through our population of patients. Mostly we see it affecting women. I wonder, if it affects men. I don't think it affects men as much as women, but maybe
definitely
maybe
more
guys
women
just don't know about it, or they're just not telling us. But I see it with my female patients all the time. Again, it's not something that usually people come into my chiropractic office saying I'm here for help with my thyroid. Usually it's neck pain, headache, something related to that. We're going through their initial history, see they're on thyroid medication. And then once we start talking about it, show the connection between nervous system, structure, and function, they start understanding how chiropractic could be something beneficial to helping their thyroid problem.
Yeah, and that was actually our very first tip. If you're just tuning in to our show, we're kind of in our fourth segment now, so we've talked a lot about it already. And if you're just tuning in, our first tip actually was chiropractic care. There's a lot of research that supports the nerve that affects the thyroid. If it's stimulated properly, it can actually increase the function of the thyroid if it's already not working very well. And that's where we come in.
Yeah, and again, many times, and it's been great. We always co-manage with their medical doctor who put them on the thyroid medication. If they want to get off the thyroid medication, we say, you know what, let's work with your doctor. Let's say it's our goal, if we can, to get you off, have you retested at, certain points in your treatment, see where you're at. And it's amazing to watch what can happen when you give that thyroid the nerve energy that it needs so that it can regain its health. And, people start getting their medicines reduced and a lot of times even off of them.
Absolutely. So if you're one of those people that is curious to know if we can help you with your thyroid problem, we've got offices all around town, and Dr. Jason and myself would love to check you out in our offices as well. We have a special just for our listeners of this show. It includes your consultation, your exam, your x-rays, and your first adjustment. This is normally over a $250 value, but for the next 20 callers, it's only $40. We've got offices in Brentwood and Franklin, Murfreesboro, and Hendersonville. Call 615-727-3107, or you can always check us out online at aguidetohealthylivingradio.com. Give us a call, and we've only got about 8 spots left, so be sure you get on our schedules for next week.
Yeah, and make sure, if you are someone who's listening right now, and maybe you're even iffy, going, I don't know if this can help, give it a shot. That's why Dr. Liz and I do what we're doing. That's why we prepare every week. We each have busy private practices, but we really have a heart and a passion to help people. And one of the things that we find with chiropractic is a lot of people have no idea what chiropractic can really do for their health. And they're in this continual pattern of they're just getting worse and worse and worse, and they don't know where to turn. And it's really our passion to say there is another way. We want to help you. Let us show you what the other way is.
Yeah, and we're not saying it's the end-all, be-all, fix everything, cure-all everything, but it is a missing puzzle piece that many people find that once they put that piece in the right place, the picture starts to make more sense, and they start noticing things improve.
And the truth is, that's the whole reason that we do this show is Dr. Liz and I were putting our heads together to say, hey, we're reaching a certain amount of a population in our own practices. How do we spread the message larger? How do we affect more people? How do we get this information to them?
Put me in front of a microphone.
In front of a microphone so that we can educate people and show them there's a different way.
All right. So that was our number one tip, of course, our favorite tip, but also we cannot ignore the dietary portion of a thyroid problem. Yep. This part alone, we could talk on for 3 hours. I mean, there's so many factors and parts and pieces that go into thyroid malfunctioning. So tip number 2 was iodine, which most people are familiar with supporting the thyroid, but also something called selenium. And we listed off some foods that contain that, including seaweed and kelp, which I know doesn't sound terribly exciting, but what were the other things that they can have easier access to?
Pasture-raised eggs. We talked about Brazilian nuts, wild-caught yellowfin tuna,
and halibut.
Halibut too, yeah.
The yellowfin tuna and halibut, which is also another white fish. It's similar, I guess I'd call it similar to cod if you've never had it. It's pretty tasty. But the trick was it has to be wild caught because the farm-raised stuff doesn't have near as much selenium in it, and the eggs need to be pasture-raised. That was the other trick with those as well. Then tip number 3 was the surprising one. We hardly ever say avoid vegetables, but in this case, we need to.
And you didn't say completely avoid. You just said limit.
Limit, yes. Well, I was going to say avoid soybeans. That's a vegetable.
Yes, there
well,
you go.
I guess technically it's a legume.
Yeah.
Whatever.
That's true.
Anyways, but limiting your raw broccoli, raw cabbage, raw Brussels sprouts, and raw cauliflower. Those are the 4 that you want to limit. Raw, you want to make sure you're eating them cooked.
And I don't think there's a ton of people out there going, what? I have to cut back on that? Most times.
Darn it, Brussels sprouts. Actually, I love Brussels sprouts.
I do, too. If they're
You've had my
right.
Brussels sprouts.
You do a good job.
I roast them so they're not raw. So that's one way you can, you can get around this rule. But when they're raw, there's an enzyme in there that actually can decrease your absorption of iodine and selenium. So you want to make sure you cook your broccoli and cauliflower, cook your Brussels sprouts and cabbage.
And those were limit, but the avoid were soy and gluten.
Soy and gluten, yeah, that's the vegetable we were going to talk about avoiding. Go back and listen to this segment. We're going to post it on our website because we kind of dug in a little deeper than we've got time to re-dig into it. But soy and gluten, huge for thyroid dysfunction and causing that weight gain that everybody's so fearful of with the thyroid problem. So now let's move into tip number 4. This one's kind of an odd one, and nobody really knows what it is unless you know what it is.
Yeah. So what is it?
So it's something that's called a hormone disruptor. And if you're not familiar with what your thyroid does, is it produces some of your hormones. And I think that's why women have more of an issue with it, because we're just big balls of hormones. But it's a hormone disruptor called a bromine. You know what a bromine is, Dr. Jason?
I'm waiting. I'm sitting here. I do, but I'm waiting for you to tell us.
Yeah. So bromines are very common hormone disruptors because they use the same receptors that your thyroid gland uses to grab onto those iodine little particles that float around in the bloodstream. So what happens is the same little receptor that's supposed to be hooking onto the iodine actually hooks onto the bromine because it looks exactly the same to the thyroid. So then the thyroid doesn't get its iodine, and this is what results in that low thyroid function because now it's not getting its iodine that it needs. So how the heck and where do we get bromine
what are
from?
these things? Where do we find them? How do we stay away from them?
So you can either ingest bromine or you can actually absorb bromine. Unfortunately, you can get this in two ways. You don't have to just eat it. Very common and high concentrations in plastics as well as pesticides. There's a lot of other things we'll talk about in a second, but plastics, plastic water bottles, plastic food containers, food storage containers, a lot of these will contain particular chemicals that make up the plastic. I don't know what the reason is for putting them in there, but they are hormone disruptors, and especially if you heat things in plastic, like putting things in your microwave. That's one way that it actually leaches into your food. But pesticides, and specifically the ones that they put on like berries are some of the dirtiest for pesticides, and they actually absorb the most because they have such thin little skins. Pesticides on your food also contain bromine. So try as hard as you can to get organic berries because that's the one that has the highest concentration of those. So those strawberries, put them back unless they're organic because they have less pesticides on them. Another couple of things that you might be getting on a regular basis that you don't know is different things in commercial breads, doughs, cookies, bagels, whatever is made of bread. They put something in the bread in particular kinds of flours as a dough conditioner, and it's supposed to help, I think, with like the texture of the bread, make it more soft. I don't know what it's for. But those kind of things can also contain the bromine that can affect your thyroid. But of course, if you listened to it a second ago, we also talked about gluten, so that's kind of a double whammy there, isn't it?
Yeah.
Other things on the list. You want to go over some of those other things?
Yeah, I mean, we can go. I mean, there's so many things. It's amazing. Once you go down this rabbit hole, you're like, oh my gosh, what can I have anymore? Because it's in so many things. But like you talked about, pesticides, plastic, soft drinks.
Soft drinks is a big one.
I mean, it's
specifically those yellowy ones.
Yeah.
If you look at the list of, I don't want to name any brand names in particular, but it's all the yellow stuff.
The citrus flavored sodas, you find it a lot all over there.
Man, one of those on that list is popular in the South.
Vegetable oils, another one. And again, we've already had a show before saying how you do not want to cook or use these at all. There's so many different substitutes for a vegetable oil, which is actually healthy for you. So this is just another reason, but no vegetable oils. Medications is a big one, too.
Mm-hmm. These are like different nasal sprays for allergies. There's certain anesthesias even when you go get put under for, I don't know, getting your wisdom teeth pulled out or I don't know, whatever they're putting people under anesthesia for. But particular types of anesthesias can contain this. So sometimes you can't avoid getting in contact with this stuff. Another common one that children have more trouble with than adults is something called fire retardants. And this is going to be the chemicals that they spray on carpets and especially baby clothing. That stuff is loaded in fire retardants, crib sheets, that sort of thing, upholstery, mattresses, that sort of stuff. They want to try to make it flame retardant so they don't catch fire as quick. But those also have hormone disruptors. And those are another way you absorb these bromines that we're talking about. So I know it sounds kind of a long list of things like I can't touch or eat anything, but really it's not as hard as you think.
And you know what? It's interesting when we were talking about foods to avoid, we talked about two specific ones, soy and gluten. And soy will fall into this hormone disruptor category, too. It's one of the big knocks against soy, if you research it, is hormone disruptor.
Mm-hmm. It's a hormone disruptor in a different way. It acts differently. As we already said, this particular one blocks the absorption of iodine. Soy does something a little bit different, but in a different way, it's also a hormone disruptor. So let's recap real quick our show because we're about to run out of time. Our number one tip, of course, our favorite thing, what we do every day. Our number one tip for thyroid function was?
Chiropractic.
Chiropractic care.
Chiropractic.
So we've only got a few spots left this week, but if you still want to get in and you're like, well, I haven't called yet, that number is 615-727-3107. What do you get when you call that number? This includes your consultation, x-ray, exams, and your first adjustment. It's normally a $250 value, but give us a call. We've got offices in Brentwood, Franklin, Murfreesboro, and Hendersonville. And again, that number is 727-3107, or check us out at aguidetohealthyliving.com. We recapped all of our tips pretty much over and over and over. So if you want to go back and hear the show, check us out online, follow us there on social media. And you know what? I guess we're out of time.
Yeah, and as always, have a wonderful, healthy week. Make these choices, take action, get your life back.